Well, this is a special unit. It was designed for ultra-Orthodox young men. It's an all-male unit, and it tended to attract what they call hilltop youth, which are sort of relatively radical settlers who believe that they can, do the best fight that they can out in what they call Judea and Samaria, which are biblical territories. And so they found themselves, just kind of making up some of their own rules.
7:52. Now, the US House of Representatives last night approved $17 billion of military aid for Israel, alongside that separate package we've been talking about this morning for Ukraine. At the same time, though, and this is complex, the US government is expected to sanction a unit of the Israeli Defense Force who are accused of human rights abuses against Palestinians in the West Bank. Now, Laura Blumenfeld is a former advisor to the US State Department Israel-Palestine negotiating team.
I think the United States is sending a clear message. It's our missiles, our morals. If you'd like to continue receiving our aid, you're going to have to play by our rules.
And so what are the rules they think have been broken? And they're clearly concerned about this.
Well, I think that they've seen an erosion of the rules of engagement, a kind of loosening of morals. Israel's been struggling with this fight for decades, and unfortunately, after October 7th, I think that there's been some kind of degradation of the game because they're so desperate.
So this part of the IDF, can you just tell us about them and what it is that they've done that the US just say, look, we cannot financially support this?
Well, this is a special unit. It was designed for ultra-Orthodox young men. It's an all-male unit, and it tended to attract what they call hilltop youth, which are sort of relatively radical settlers who believe that they can, do the best fight that they can out in what they call Judea and Samaria, which are biblical territories. And so they found themselves, just kind of making up some of their own rules. And it was concerning. As Secretary Blinken said at the very beginning, when he first came out to Israel to show his support following the October 7th massacre, how you do this matters. And so today, I think the message is, the era of unconditional love and guns is over.
Several other sort of IDF and police units had also been investigated. They're not going to be sanctioned because they'd remedied their behaviour. To what extent do you think the US really feels as though it's got a proper understanding of exactly what actions are being carried out?
Well, the role of sanctions aren't to punish, right? They're to deter violations, human rights violations. And there's been tremendous pressure on this administration as the mounting casualties have come. The human toll is intolerable. And you even saw today, I mean, we had the West Bank boiling, and then there was another strike in Rafah. And I think, again, to quote Secretary Blinken, superpowers don't bluff. And it was time for the US to draw some red lines and show that they were not going to allow the Israelis to cross it. On the other hand, you have the Palestinians also angry at the US government. President Mahmoud Abbas today said that he felt unprecedented anger toward the United States for vetoing their bid for statehood, which went before the UN Security Council. So I don't know. Today was one of these days where I felt like the United States was like a guy trying to break up a bar fight and ending up with a black eye.
You said at some point there's a red line. I mean, this is the first time the US have imposed sanctions on any Israeli military unit. How significant really is that?
It's very significant. I mean, all along they've been trying to balance their support for Israel. They showed just last Saturday night when they helped Israel repel the attack from Iran, we've got your back, but don't open a new front. And I think that they're afraid that there's a front opening up in the West Bank, if not, up in the north with Hezbollah. The United States' first goal, aside from freeing the hostages, is to prevent a regional expansion, a conflagration, because that just goes against our own national security priorities, which is, we might forget, but it's countering a rising China and pushing back on an aggressive Russia. The Middle East is a terrible distraction and diversion of our resources.
We've seen a real sort of shift in tone, in language towards Israel, particularly from the United States and from the UK, other allies deeply concerned about what's happening to civilians in Gaza. Then a real doubling down of support. And as you described there, what happened last weekend, the US and the UK's support in terms of staving off that unprecedented missile attack from Iran. And really maybe that's bolstered bolstered Israel, but in amongst that picture, extremely complex, very messy, lots of things going on different fronts. Do you think that the relationship between Netanyahu and Biden, or Netanyahu and his closest allies, is, to say the least, strained?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, they go back for decades, and Biden had some affection for Netanyahu, but there's this issue in life saving. They call it a double drowning. It's when you're trying to rescue somebody and the drowning victim is thrashing around so dangerously that he can bring the lifeguard down with him. And I think that's what's concerning Biden, not only politically. I mean, we see it with the swing states in the United States where sort of Democratic voters are turning against Biden because of his unconditional support for Israel. But put aside the politics, I think morally, I mean, Biden is very much grounded in values, and he's having real complex relationship right now with Netanyahu. So I think what he's trying to do is separate himself from Netanyahu, and in a sense, appeal over his head to the general population of Israel who also don't support Netanyahu.
Do you think these sanctions will have the desired effect?
I think they send a clear message as ever. Look, it's confusing. It's confusing for everybody. Think of the Palestinians who are sitting out there in Gaza and they look up to the sky and there's bombs dropping backed by the United States and bags of flour backed by the United States. Clearly, this is a very complicated time and the United States is trying to do the best they can.
In that, we've just looked at the congressional funding package, and there is then $26 billion for Israel. You talked there about the differences in where they're spending and how they're spending, who they're supporting. How significant will that sum of money be, and what will it be spent on?
No, it's fascinating. $9 billion of the 26 is for humanitarian aid. So, critics will say this is a two-faced solution, right? We can't trust them. It's insincere. They're playing both sides. But I do think that there's this real sincerity behind it. I don't think it's two-faced. I just think it's hard. It's always been hard. When I worked for the State Department under the Obama administration, I used to go to the Middle East and I would go to the Israelis and I'd say, we see you have a problem and we're here with a two-state solution. And at the time, Israelis would say, problem, what problem? Because everything was peaceful. And then I'd go to the Palestinians and I'd say, we see your problem. We're here for a two-state solution. And they would say, what two states? Because at the time they didn't support it. It's always been hard. I just think it's unprecedented.